On the day Medea prepared poison for Psyche, everything changed. They woke up in each other's bodies. Medea became the beloved of the crown prince, who once betrayed her, and Psyche took the body of a woman who can love and betray to death. Secret desires, jealousy, and revenge will drive them to fight until their last breath. Subscribe to the channel and hit like right now, because that's the only thing that keeps me motivated to make more videos. The people enthusiastically congratulated the crown prince of the Ephyreto Empire and his bride. All the subjects were overjoyed. Some showered the couple with flowers, and some shouted joyfully. Ialos Orna Ephyreto looked tenderly at Psyche Colli, daughter of Count Polly. On this windy day, in front of the cheering townspeople, they had a joyous engagement. But among all those present, one dark-haired girl was not happy about it. She clenched her teeth in anger. The fact was that the title of crown princess had once been hers. Psyche waved a hand to the townspeople. Someone asked if they were going south on vacation. A man said that earlier Psyche had lost in a fight for the right to be crown princess. Her opponent was from the ducal family, who had made an assassination attempt on the imperial family. It was said that the case was fabricated so that the crown prince would choose Lady Psyche. A man believed that the crown prince may have publicly announced a break with House Belid. He believed that Medea Belid would have difficulty finding a groom and wanted to ask for her hand in marriage. His interlocutor covered his mouth when he saw Medea looking at them. The knight advised her not to waste her time with commoners and to return home. His words made her think for a moment. Her violet eyes were cold. She turned around and told the man who spoke of her that she would remember his face. After that, she got into a carriage that went straight to her house. The men were excited and greatly surprised that she left without even punishing them. A man who had fallen to the ground with fear said confidently that Belial was finished. A friend told him to be quiet. He replied that silence could be more frightening than 1,000 words. The town was noisy. A woman asked him if he had heard that a body had been found on the shore. The man asked how the man had died. She replied that he had slipped and fallen. The strange thing was that this man suddenly had his tongue cut off. Medea bit her finger and thought about something, then looked at her brother. She asked her brother how her mother was. He replied that her condition was not good. They went to her mother's room and quickly opened the door, which creaked open. The doctor nervously wiped sweat from his face. The husband wanted to hear the truth about her condition. He replied that his wife's illness had worsened greatly since her imprisonment. When he heard that his wife would have a hard time living for a year, he started throwing everything around. Medea knew who caused this to happen. The maids offered to straighten her out. She replied if Psyche was attacked now, the crown prince would come and avenge her. Clutching her dress, Medea thought that Psyche was now with him. Her anger had not subsided. Psyche held her beautiful hat with her hand and gazed intently into the distance. The crown prince asked her what she was looking at. The girl asked him to come to her. She led him to a merchant who was selling different shells, stones, and jewelry. Psyche whispered that she wanted to send a gift for the duke's daughter. He said that Medea had done wrong to her, but Psyche wanted to be reconciled to her. The vendor held out a box and said it was popular with visitors. It was made from the minerals of the region, and its color resembled the ocean. Hearing this, the crown prince smirked. He covered his mouth with his hand to keep from laughing. Psyche asked if something was wrong. The man replied that the thing was very valuable. He told her to send it to her. He wanted to see her reaction to the gift. Medea sat at the table and looked carefully at the box on the table in front of her. The man said he had been asked to see to it that she opened the gift. She smiled and replied that she would do so, for it was a gift from the crown princess. As she opened the box, she worried that she wouldn't be able to hide her disappointment if the man watched her silently as she saw the contents inside and fell silent. Neither sadness nor irritation could be reflected on her emotionless face. Placing the box on the table, she said Psyche was especially attentive this time. She promised to send her something in return. The man said he would pass on her reply. After that, he bowed and left the room. The door closed quickly behind him. The maid told Medea that he had left and wanted to say something else, but she didn't have time. Medea immediately got up from her chair and grabbed the table lamp from the table with her hand. The girl didn't hold back her anger and swung it hard and threw it to the floor. Shards flew around. The maid excitedly asked her to calm down, for blood was pouring from the wound on her arm. Hearing this, Medea immediately stopped. She began to breathe, trying to calm herself down. Sweat appeared on her face with excitement. An open box lay on the floor, and next to it was a ring with a sky blue colored stone. Its color did indeed resemble the ocean. Medea shrieked, "How dare she!" The girl couldn't forget how Psyche had become crown princess by pathetic means. Medea thought she had sent her the ring under the guise of a gift to humiliate her. After some silence, she clenched her hand tightly into a fist and made her decision. The girl said confidently, since Psyche wanted war, she would definitely get it. Night had fallen. The sky above Count Polly's mansion was covered with many stars. Nanny asked if her health had recovered. Psyche replied that she was fine. There was a knock on the room to say that they had received flowers. What the lady of the house of Belial. Psyche took the bouquet of red lilies and began to read the letter from Medea with interest. She wrote that it was a thank you for the gift and that the smell of the flower would help her sleep. Medea offered to meet, for she wanted to discuss what had happened between them. When she finished reading the letter, Psyche did not say a word. She was very touched by her words. Psyche hugged the letter with the flowers and sat down. Nanny asked if she liked them. The girl said joyfully that her sincerity had reached Lady Medea at last. She asked, getting everything ready as soon as possible. Medea looked at the bottle. It contained a purple liquid. She was glad Psyche had fallen into her trap. When they met, Psyche apologized for inviting her with short notice. Psyche explained that she had to go to the temple tomorrow. Medea asked her not to worry. She offered to drink tea made from leaves and sugar she had recently bought. Medea suggested she put a sugar cube in her cup to make the tea sweeter. Psyche said she knew a lot about tea, took her advice, and tasted the tea. After looking at her carefully, Medea asked if she liked the tea. The girl replied that it was very flavorful. Medea advised her to purchase one for her. The maids were surprised that they were talking quietly. The knight was standing nearby. Medea overheard their conversation and said that all the servants seemed to love Psyche. After all, she treated them like family, despite their status. Psyche thanked her. Medea said that wasn't a compliment and asked if she could hear them talking. She offered to slap them instead of Psyche and take all the blame for it. Psyche refused. A knight came up to them and apologized for interrupting their conversation. Since Psyche needed to go to the temple tomorrow, he asked Medea to leave now. The girl immediately realized that this was the knight whom Psyche held so dear. He was from a family of knights who had sworn to protect Polly's house from birth. Medea replied that she would not stay in a place where she was treated so badly. Afterward, she left the mansion and got into her carriage, which traveled home. The knight asked where Madame was. The maid replied that she was now in her room. Slowly opening the door, which creaked open, the maid looked inside the room. Psyche lay motionless on the floor. The maid cried out alarmed, "Madame!" As she laid her on the bed, she saw her face flushed and her breathing quickened. The butler said her fever was getting worse and ordered her to call a doctor. The knight thought they couldn't call for just anyone if they knew she was ill. Then, on the day of prayer, the duke's daughter would be the only one standing in the temple. He quickly put on his cloak and asked him to look after Madame, for he had to leave. The forest was eerie, and everything was sparkling all around. The knight asked his horse not to stop. The horse's eyes became red, and it did not want to go any further, and stood on its haunches. The knight could not keep up and fell down. He did not understand why the horse did not listen to him. The horse turned and galloped away, not responding to his words, and leaving him in the forest. Medea came up to him and told him what a shame, and that this fall had not killed him. Seeing her, the knight's eyes filled with fear. He muttered how Medea had a sword in her hands, and her dress was covered in blood. He asked how she had gotten here. As he rode his horse, he tried to figure out what her plan was this time. The knight realized something was wrong. He checked the flowers for poison, and the cup too. Of course, he remembered that the girls drank tea from the same teapot. The horse stopped and roared. He wanted to calm her down, and asked what had gotten into her. Medea knew he was coming. She asked if he had been serving Psyche since he was a child. His body was covered with trembling. He looked up with fear in his eyes and asked what she meant. Medea pierced him sharply with her sword and demanded that he answer her question. Pulling out the bloody sword, she said she would make her feel the same pain. Her face was covered in the knight's blood. She said joyfully that she would take everything from Psyche. The moon was shining brightly. Medea said that the very smell of the flowers had no effect. But, combined with sugar cubes and this poison, the smell of the flowers will become deadly. Wiping the blood from her face, the girl smiled and remarked that she had acted foolishly because she kept explaining something to the dead knight. The breathless body of the knight lay not far away in a pool of his own blood. The wind had picked up, and only the rustling of the leaves of the trees could be heard in the forest. The man asked if it was too open, though it cleared the entire area. Pushing the corpse of the knight with his foot, he noticed that he didn't even have his sword with him. Therefore, he felt that their battle could not even be called a duel. Medea told him to cut the crap and asked if he had prepared everything. Heli replied, yes. After a while, He asked her if Psyche was dying. Fixing her hair, Medea replied that she was sure she would wake up soon. She was right. Everything was going according to her plan after all. Psyche sliced a piece of meat. The girl slowly chewed the food she had been forcing herself to eat with such difficulty. Her father was worried that her weakness would cause her to faint in the temple. She apologized. After breakfast, the maids helped her to dress and make her hair beautiful. Before leaving for the temple, he turned around and told the servants that they would see her later. The nanny was worried about the night, and the maid was grateful for the good treatment. The butler wanted to repay their kindness. He said they should look for the knight. The maid raised her hand and said she would go looking for him herself. They went into the forest. The girl said she navigated the forest well, and she could go alone. The man replied that it was too dangerous. He thought that the knight could not have gotten lost, and something had definitely happened. Suddenly, the maid interrupted him, saying that there was someone out there in the distance. Up ahead, they saw a tall man with silver hair. In his hands, he held the clothes of the missing knight. The man ran up to him and called out to him. The maid quickly followed him. The Marquis turned around and looked at them intently with his violet eyes. The blue sky was covered with white clouds. The service had already begun in the temple. The priest took out a golden cross, which glittered in the sunlight. He put it around Psyche's neck and said that this artifact would grant peace this year. Hearing that the fate of the empire was in Psyche's hands, the people clapped their hands joyfully. On the day of prayer, only Psyche is allowed to enter the temple to prevent misfortune. He feared that his days as a priest would be numbered if they knew that he had given her the key. Medea took the key, realizing that the man wore a cloak to conceal his identity. The priest trusted her, for she had been introduced by the Marquis Harry. Then he tapped the floor. Suddenly, a secret passage with many steps that led downward opened. He explained that she just had to go down here. Taking the lamp, she went forward. After receiving a blow to the face, the man grabbed the wound with his hand and thought he would soon die. He thought that the man in front of him was very strong, and maybe he had killed the knight. Grabbing the maid by the leg, he told her to run and call someone for help. The girl ran quickly, leaving the wounded man on the ground. But what happened next simply shocked the man who was watching her. She walked over to Marquis and took the knight's cape that he was holding in his hands. She asked if the lady had said anything unusual. The Marquis asked, "Unusual." The maid remembered seeing the knight watching Medea's departure. Then she went to Psyche's room and opened the door to see how she was. And everything that happened next to Psyche made her nervous and worried. The man pulled himself up and anxiously asked, "It's not true, is it?" He barked out, how could she betray Psyche after all she had done for her? The maid turned away, and the Marquis pointed his sword at him, saying he was talking too much. The girl muttered, so she was saying it would be better if she went alone. The blow of the sword pierced the man's body, whose blood splattered all around. A couple drops of blood quickly fell into the water. Light fell on a majestic statue of a god with wings, with an angel in front of it. Psyche knelt before the statue and prayed earnestly for the empire and the people. Medea appeared behind her back and slowly approached her. She sat down next to her and removed her hood. Psyche interrupted her prayer and said, "Lady." Medea smiled and asked if she was surprised and had been expecting her. Psyche answered nothing, but only continued to look at her in silence. Then she angrily asked what Medea had done to her knight, to which Medea looked surprised and answered why she would tell her. Psyche hugged her sharply. Medea could not keep her balance and fell to the floor. The girl asked Medea if she resented her for stealing the crown prince. Psyche shouted that she didn't even love him, but only loved his title. Medea asked if Psyche really expected her to give her the throne. With tears in her eyes that ran down her cheeks, Psyche asked, "Can't you?" The artifact in the shape of a cross around her neck suddenly glittered. Medea pushed her away, telling her to move away, for she had nothing to say to Psyche. She felt sick at the thought that the fate of the empire was in her hands, and sorry for the people. Suddenly, she fell into the water and began to be pulled down. Psyche rushed to her aid. She cried out, "My lady!" But Medea did not answer, only fell deeper and deeper. Something kept pulling her down. The girl could not resist. Suddenly, Medea realized that she could breathe underwater. She realized it was God's power and decided to mentally say her prayer. Reaching out her hand, Medea turned to God, who was watching over Ephrata. She prayed to him to give her a chance instead of this foolish girl. Grasping Psyche's shoulder, Medea asked God to help her take everything away from her. There was a surge of divine power, and her prayer was answered. Barely opening her eyes, she heard the voices of the servants asking her to come to her senses. In front of her, she saw the nurse and the maid, who were glad to see her awake. The maid asked if she was all right, to which the girl replied by asking where she was. The nanny asked her not to joke around like that. The girl did not understand why her maids were not there. Crying, the nanny said why such terrible things happened to Madame Psyche. Hearing this, she got up and went to the mirror, despite the maid's request that she not go. The maid said she might faint. The girl touched the mirror. Seeing her reflection in the mirror, her hand trembled and her heart beat faster. She touched her face and couldn't believe she was in Psyche's body. The first thing that came to her mind was that it was a dream, but she dismissed that thought at once. The door of her room opened abruptly, and an excited crown prince entered the room. Psyche turned around and greeted him anxiously, not realizing what was going on. Taking her hand, the crown prince was relieved and said he was very glad she was awake. Pressing her hand to his cheek, he told her that he was worried she wouldn't come to her senses. He felt sick just thinking about it. His frank words surprised the girl. Without waiting for her reply, the crown prince immediately embraced her. He vowed to punish the lady who had harmed her and spoiled her prayer day. Psyche hugged him back and remained silent. And then the girl smiled joyfully, for she realized that she was now in her revenge. Meanwhile, Psyche saw Medea's reflection in the mirror and was surprised. She slapped herself on the cheek, thinking it was a dream, but the girl cried out in pain. And at that moment, she realized that she was awake, and this was reality. However, she became alarmed as to who was now in her body. Before she could put the second slipper on her foot, the girl ran down the stairs. Seeing her, the maid was glad that Medea was already awake and had come downstairs. She paid no attention to her, but looked anxiously ahead and ran somewhere. The servants said that it was raining outside and that the Duke had told her to come to him. Clutching herself with her hands on her head, she told them not to call her lady. She wanted to go home. Suddenly, there was lightning in the sky, and thunder rumbled. Psyche asked the crown prince if he would sentence Medea to death. The girl smiled and asked him not to say such strange things. She was sure Medea had her reasons. The servants were delighted with her kindness, though she wanted to be beheaded, but she realized that Psyche didn't want that. The crown prince sighed heavily and said that he knew she would react this way. There was a knock at the door, and he asked what the noise was outside. The butler entered the room. Standing outside the door was Medea, who wanted to see Psyche and talk to her. The man replied that the crown prince was now inside. Hearing this, she rejoiced. She said all the more reason to enter the room. The door was opened by the crown prince. He looked at her fiercely, as if he were trying to execute her on the spot. The crown prince did not stand on ceremony, and immediately held out his hand to her. He grabbed her by the neck and told her that she was not sick, since she had the courage to come here. He also thought she should be grateful that he had not cut her throat. Psyche stood nearby and covered her mouth with her hand so that no one would see her smile. The crown prince was showing that he loved Psyche, but he couldn't recognize her in her other guise. He reported that Lady Belial was forbidden to be on the grounds of the count's mansion, and so Psyche could sleep in peace. Through the rain, the twinkling of stars could be seen. Medea looked at her new body and frail arms, devoid of strength, her short stature. Even the way this body breathed was beautiful, though it was foreign to her. A maid approached her and called out to her. Psyche immediately turned around. The maid anxiously announced that there was something she wanted to tell her. As if feeling guilty, she confessed that she had been a spy for the house of Belial, that she had done so because of her family's hospital debts, and that a knight and a servant had been killed by a beast. Embracing the maid, Psyche said that she was sorry for not noticing how hard it had been for her. In fact, she wanted to rip out her insolent tongue and feed it to the dogs, but she decided if she returned to her body, she would kill her. If not, she would let her live. In the morning, she was awakened by the sun's rays. The girl raised her hand upward. Seeing that she continued to be in Psyche's body, she said, "What luck?" Clenching her hand tightly into a fist, she was certain that their souls had switched places. Medea, meanwhile, also woke up and realized that meant God had granted the wish. She remembered the temple and tried to figure out if it was God's will. The next day of prayer was a year later. She was not sure if she would return to her body. She never wanted that to happen. A black raven appeared outside the window. Hugging herself tightly, she thought of her parents and the crown prince and didn't know what to do. She knew that Lady Medea had many enemies in this world, and she was stronger than all of them put together. But Psyche realized that she was weak and could not go through this like Lady Medea, and as soon as she showed the slightest weakness, she would die immediately. She was sad that she was so powerless, and it wasn't clear what she could do to survive. There was a knock at the door, and a maid entered the room. She announced that she had brought food for her, as Medea had missed all her meals. The maid said in a trembling voice that she had prepared soup for her. Medea held out her hand to her, which made the maid flinch, thinking she was going to hit her. But Medea took only a spoonful, and smiling, thanked her for the food. A silence ensued. She was surprised, Medea looked at her questioningly. The maid said she had done her duty and wanted to put the linens away later. The black raven flew fast and approached its master and cawed. Heli held out his hand so that the raven could net his hand. As soon as the raven perched on his hand, Heli saw that Medea had not opened his letter. In 7 years, they'd never had a time when they'd gone so long without contacting each other. Of course, he was sure she was fine. After all, it was Medea. Butler was walking down the hallway with many papers in his hands and humming something. As he entered the master's office, he informed him that today's schedule, but he received no reply as Milord quickly left the room. The butler caught up with him and asked him where he was going. He replied that he wanted to visit Medea, but the butler reminded him of his request. Helio replied that he had already finished everything. Lowering his head, Butler said quietly that he was powerless to stop him. The carriage moved from its place. Butler had heard strange rumors about Lady Medea. His lord was so sensitive when it came to her. Outside, the sun shone brightly, and white clouds floated across the blue sky. The maids were delighted with the necklace the Crown Prince had given Psyche. It matched the color of her hair. The maid asked her to look out the window. She saw that the trees that the Count had planted to make her well were in bloom. Psyche told Ialos that she was getting stuffy after being inside for so long. The Crown Prince asked her to call him by his first name instead of Your Highness. At first, she was surprised and felt awkward, not knowing what to do. Then she smiled, for everything was going so smoothly, and said cheerfully, "Ialos!" She thought that soon they would be married, and she would be a member of the imperial family. Everything was going well. She noticed that Polly's family was really overprotective. Psyche realized that any step towards the main gate would arouse suspicion. She needed to get in touch with Helio. She told Ialos that she wanted to go to the market. The Crown Prince replied that he had business nearby and would escort her there. The marketplace was very busy and noisy. People with purchases in their hands were walking forward. Psyche was pleased, as she had purchased a messenger bird. She was waiting for the Crown Prince. He asked her to stay away as they discussed matters of state. The girl wondered if he drew that line, for she was not yet his wife. She wanted to listen to their conversation, though. She sat down at the table and picked up a book in her hands. Psyche quickly began reading the book, turning page after page. The door opened abruptly and creaked open. The Crown Prince entered the room. He removed his cloak and apologized for keeping her waiting. She replied that it was all right. The girl explained that while she was reading, time had passed so quickly. Seeing the book on the table she was reading, the Crown Prince was surprised. Then he suddenly laughed, which surprised and offended Psyche, for she thought that he had just laughed at her. Ialos picked up the book, The Decline and Fall of the Times, before the restriction of the Empire of Efferento. He thought the book was good but difficult for her, so he offered to buy her a story. Psyche wondered if this is how he should behave to the one he loves. And at that moment, the girl realized his true feelings. Looking at his face, she had no more doubts. That look with which he looked at her said it all. His gaze was full of contempt for the girl sitting in front of him. The room was very dark. Medea quickly lit the candles on the lampstand. Taking the lampstand in her hands, she tried to figure out where she was. There was only darkness all around and nothing could be seen. A light could be seen ahead. The girl heard someone ask why the deception. She shuddered. Many hands reached for her, telling her that she was not their lady. They surrounded her and asked her why she was pretending to be her. The girl shouted that no, she... The Crown Prince raised his sword and said that right here and now he would behead her. Mysterious hands grabbed her and wouldn't let her go. Seeing the Crown Prince's sword approaching, Psyche cried out, "Save!" But it was too late. The Crown Prince, with one blow of his sword, had taken her life. The girl woke up in a cold sweat and breathing heavily. Her body trembled with fear. The maid opened the curtain and let light into the room, then greeted Medea. Receiving no response from Psyche, the Crown Prince asked why she was silent. He leaned over and looked at her warily, without saying a word. She cried and asked him to forgive her, for she did not mean to disturb him. The girl whispered in his ear that the truth was... Ialos wondered. After some silence, he suggested that we continue the conversation elsewhere. They quickly got into the carriage and drove home. The weather outside was beautiful. Psyche said that because of her fainting spells, she had difficulty beginning to remember certain things, so she thought that reading would help her memories to recover. He took her hand and asked her if she hated him for that misunderstanding. She replied that she felt guilty, for she had forgotten the time she had spent with him. The Crown Prince held her in his arms as gently as if he cared for her. They were thinking of different things, She asked to tell how they had come to love each other. The sunlight was breaking through the leaves of the trees. A bird sat on a branch and sang. Medea tried to figure out what caused the nightmares, if it was guilt. The maid brought buns for her. The servants eventually got used to her behavior. She noticed that Duke Belial was rarely home, and his wife was gravely ill. The girl ventured to send a letter to Psyche, but never received a reply. She felt sad, for there was one person she wished to avoid meeting. A servant girl came hurrying towards her. She waved her hand and called out to her. The maid told her that the Marquis would be here soon. Medea and the maid were surprised. The maid ran up to the butler, and they held hands, rejoicing at the Marquis' visit. The Marquis' carriage quickly pulled into the grounds of the Duke's estate. Helio looked out the window intently and looked forward to seeing Medea. The girl was troubled. She began to remember everything she knew about him. Helio Travium was the young, handsome Marquis and head of the Travium family. At the age of 14, he lost his parents to an accident. Without even giving him time to grieve, the greedy nobles tried to influence him, and thus they quickly ruined his family. During this difficult time for him, Helio met Lady Medea. She was the only one who reached out to him and gave him guidance. He quickly re-established himself as head of House Travium and led the family to prosperity. They had known each other for 7 years. She wondered if she could deceive him. Psyche watched him from afar one day and had never before interacted with him because she was frightened by this strange and sinister aura emanating from him. The Marquis' carriage stopped and he got out. He was met by Medea and her servants. Helio greeted her politely. He smiled happily and asked how she was doing. The girl remained silent and repeated to herself mentally to keep her emotions in check. The Marquis told her that he had dreamed of meeting her for so long. He looked around carefully, trying to get a sense of the surroundings of the estate. His fears were not confirmed, and everything seemed peaceful here. Something alarmed him. This calmness was already suspicious in itself. He was approached by Duke Belial, who had gone outside, for he had heard the noise from the street. They greeted each other. It was the first time she had seen Medea's father so close. She was glad he had come. For a moment, Helio's gaze became so fierce. It seemed to her that he had guessed about the body swap, but it was unlikely. The Duke suggested that he have a duel with Medea, for they had been competing for a long time. He decided to escort them to the training ground. Medea turned to her father. She asked him to wait, as she was not ready. Helio grabbed her by the pigtail. He said he had never seen her braid her hair like that before, and it was the first time in his memory. Marquis smiled and waited for her reaction. Suddenly, she remembered the dream when the Crown Prince had taken her life. She grabbed herself with her hand around her neck, and it was hard for her to swallow, and her heart was pounding fast. She was very scared when she heard the ringing of the sword. The servant stood not far away and said that it had been a long time since their last battle. Taking the sword in his hand, Helio asked Medea to be gentle with him during the battle. She was surprised that the best swordsman in the empire would make such a request of her. Medea reached out for the sword and didn't know if she could lift that piece of metal, but to her surprise, she succeeded, and the sword seemed so light. It was incomprehensible to her how this was possible. She thought it was because of Medea's strength in her. Clutching the hilt of the sword tightly, she was glad she was able to hold the sword in her hands. Helio remembered how Medea had taught him how to hold the sword properly in the past. She had said that one hand should rest at the bottom of the hilt and the other on top. That would help hold it despite the weight. She smiled and showed him how to hold it. Suddenly, Helio grabbed Medea's sword with his hand. The girl didn't know what to do. Helio noticed that she was not holding the sword with both hands. He knew that Medea would not make such a mistake, so he immediately asked who she was. Her hand trembled, and she realized that she had been exposed. She tried to figure out how the real Medea would have acted, based on her observations. She asked, "Did you just address me as you?" Looking at him angrily, the girl shouted that he was an insolent chump. She repeated again how he dared to address her as you. With a quick swing of her sword, she aimed the sword at his neck. Medea said that the Marquis seemed to have forgotten the things she had done for him, but Helio remained silent and stood motionless. It was apparent to him that she was acting too naively, and it could not be Medea, but he could not understand. If it was not she, then who was standing before him? Without taking his eyes off her, Helio thought that maybe he had just made a mistake. He decided to act and approached her. Blood began to drip onto the ground from his wound he received from her sword. The girl didn't understand what was happening or why he decided to act this way. Grabbing her sword with his hands and holding it to her neck, Helio told her to punish him, for her faithful servant had crossed the boundaries of what was permissible and would pay with his own blood. Medea quickly took the sword and tossed it aside, which surprised him. The bloody sword quickly fell to the ground. The girl shouted that this was the end of their duel. A servant girl standing nearby raised her sword. She was surprised that blood had been spilled in the practice duel. The butler said that this had never happened before. Soon Marquis had the wound on her neck treated and a band-aid applied. He apologized for the commotion he had caused. Medea replied that it was all right. Helio asked if he could be her chaperone at the banquet next week. The girl did not expect such a question and looked at him carefully. She noticed that the Marquis' eyes were red, and perhaps he could barely hold back tears. Her hand instinctively reached out to him, as if by magic. Touching his cheek, she replied that of course he could accompany her. And then she smiled brightly and said, who could he be, if not him? After their conversation, they said goodbye, and Helio's carriage went to his house. Medea's arm and body trembled, but she was able to do it. As she squeezed her hand, she realized that she never thought she could pull this off. However, at that moment, the girl realized that it was wrong, because it wasn't her who did it. It was Lady Medea. Still, she was overwhelmed with new feelings of joy and pride. The butler stood outside the mansion and said when it had time to start raining so hard. A little yellow bird stood beside him under an umbrella. The carriage stopped, and Butler held out the umbrella to the Marquis. He asked if the meeting had gone well. Helio replied that something funny had happened. Medea called him Helio. She had not called him that since the coming-of-age ceremony, although she had always used the nickname Heli before. Clenching his hand tightly into a fist, he wondered if something had changed, but he didn't know when. Outside, night had fallen. The moon brightly illuminated Earl Polly's mansion. The maid brushed her hair and asked if she couldn't sleep because of the excitement. Psyche replied that she was nervous because they, as a couple, would be in public. The maid thought it was so romantic. Aristocrats would gather at the banquet. There will be performances and delicious viands, and their lords will be the center of attention. When asked why she was more excited than Madame, the maid replied, because. Thereupon she smiled, and saying goodnight to Madame, left the room. Psyche smiled and waved her hand, saying she wished the same to them. Once the door closed, she hid her emotions and tired of the tedious game. She sat down comfortably on the chair that stood near the table. The maid had already grown tired of her because of her constant talking. The girl looked away and thought maybe she should get rid of them all, but she dismissed the thought because everything would become meaningless after her marriage to Ialos. The preparations were complete. On the table were a cage with a bird, a lemon, and paper. Psyche took the quill in her hand and began to write a message. There were lemon slices lying nearby. She used the juice of the lemon as ink, for such ink helped to write a hidden message. The text would manifest itself by placing the paper over a fire. Many people did not know this. She thought Heli must have noticed the change in her behavior. This letter detailed the events that led to the exchange of bodies. Taking the raven in her hand, she said she would attach the message to its paw. As soon as everything was ready, the raven flew out of Psyche's window. The raven flew high and flew fast, and a note could be seen on its foot. But it could not fly to the appointed place, for it was shot down on the way there. His dead body, along with the message, was quickly delivered to the Crown Prince. He read it without difficulty, and was surprised that the sender was Medea. The message stated that she was currently in Psyche's mansion. There was something else written there, which he silently read. After folding the message, he said that everything was clear and ordered him to report what had happened. The man said that the bird flew out of Psyche's room with a note to Helio Travium. Ialos praised him for his work and told him to burn the note and that he would go to Psyche's room tomorrow. The man did his bidding and burned the letter. The girl looked up at the sky where the moon appeared surrounded by white clouds. She could not tear her gaze away from the beautiful view and thought of the Crown Prince. The girl laughed as she was able to accomplish her goal, because right now, the Crown Prince had to intercept her fake letter, and the real letter probably already delivered by a black seal right to the recipient. Psyche hid the letter with purple paper tied in a bow on the cat's tail. Helio saw the kitty, immediately picked it up, and asked in surprise who the kitty was. When he saw the bow on its tail, he thought it was paper, but it was a letter from Medea. Psyche, meanwhile, had already dressed herself, and thanks to the maid, she looked beautiful. The maid asked her if she liked the jewelry. She answered that she did. From the open door could be heard the displeasure of the servants at the sudden arrival of Ialos. When Psyche saw the Crown Prince, she was immediately wary and worried. He looked at her and said that he thought she had something to tell him. There was a teapot and cups on the table, and on a plate were some delicious cookies for their tea party. Psyche replied cheerfully, that she had woken up happy yesterday because she had dreamed about him. Ialos sipped his tea and looked questioningly around. He did not want to discuss such nonsense. She explained that when she heard of his visit, she thought, maybe it's telepathy? The Crown Prince placed the cup on the saucer, causing the saucer beneath it to jingle. He smiled and said that her love for him was immensely great. Since she was dreaming about him, she replied that he was right. Ialos leaned his hand on the table, which made it creak. Ialos whispered in her ear to let her ask him for one favor. He wanted her to stop communicating with Medea and quoted the words from the letter. The girl became nervous and anxiously asked how he knew. She sat down in a chair, lowered her head, and covered her face with her hands. Psyche just remained silent. Of course, she had long ago noticed the oversight from the Crown Prince's cronies. As soon as Ialos appeared nearby, the watchers within a 10-meter radius disappeared. She realized that his spies didn't see Psyche as a threat and were being careless. Because of this, she could take action. Psyche replied that she could explain everything. She said that Marquis Helio had written to her that Medea wanted to rekindle their friendship. As proof, the Marquis gave her a letter with a fragment of their correspondence. But on the day of their meeting, because of His Highness's visit, they were unable to talk. Medea asked if they would see each other at the banquet. Psyche sent the letter back with a refusal. Wiping away his tears, Psyche said he knew the details and what the purpose of their meeting was. She explained that she didn't realize the whole situation and looked pathetic in his eyes. The Crown Prince did not interrupt her, but listened to her explanation in silence. Afterward, he abruptly stood up and walked over to her. The girl sat with a distressed look, covering her face with her hands. Ialos approached her and, to her surprise, gently embraced her, trying to comfort and reassure her. Kissing her forehead, he said that he did not think that way about her, but was worried about his beloved. The Crown Prince turned to Butler, who was standing nearby. He ordered, bringing the dress and jewelry that Psyche would wear to the banquet. Ialos asked Psyche if she would give him her hand. The girl hesitated, but then she held out her hand, and the Crown Prince attached the bracelet, saying it was perfect. He explained that this jewelry would easily cover any bruises on her arm. The girl was wary, for there was some threat to her in his words, and at that moment, he quickly placed heavy handcuffs on her hands. Ialos said that Medea was plotting a plot against her and might poison her. He told the servants to lock her in the cellar and see to it that she did not contact Medea. The servant led her away. Psyche cried out anxiously, "Your Highness!" The Crown Prince stroked her cheek, promising to let her go before the festivities began. With an innocent look, he said he was doing so because of his great love for her. She could not believe that he was willing to lock up the one he loved in a dungeon for protection. The story of the revival of friendship was in case Psyche lurched at the banquet. Turning around, she prayed that someone would stop him. All the servants stood still. The nanny sobbed, the maid turned away, and the butler was silent. Nanny took out a handkerchief and wiped the tears that poured down her cheeks. The woman asked why Psyche was disappointing His Highness. Her question did not so much surprise the girl as shock her. She wondered if there was no one in this house in their right mind. After what had happened, a silence formed in the room. Ialos asked Butler if he had resorted to harsh measures, for he had no choice. The Crown Prince said that Medea was unlike anyone else in this world. He thought she was the most wicked, cunning, and shrewd woman. Ialos couldn't do anything about it, and decided that precautions wouldn't hurt. Going downstairs, the girl thought, so there is such a place. She walked at a leisurely pace, thinking of the people around her who could help her. The dungeon door opened and creaked open. She felt creepy and uneasy. Psyche looked forward to the place of her imprisonment with fear in her eyes. She felt hurt that no one around her had warned her that something was going wrong. Outside, night had fallen, and the moon illuminated the mansion where Medea lived. A man stepped onto the branch of a tree that grew near the girl's window. Hearing a knock on the window, Medea immediately turned around and looked in that direction. The girl said, "Is the wind really that strong outside?" Suddenly, the wind blew, and leaves from the trees got on her hair. This was because the window opened, through which the wind flew into the room. And then the Marquis Helio also entered the room through it, adjusting his cloak. He thought, 2 knocks on the right window close to her bed. They were a signal she and Medea had made up to see each other in secret. Right now, the girl in front of him didn't realize such a technique existed. She was startled, and then said in a trembling voice how rude. He interrupted her and offered to introduce himself to his friend again, calling her Psyche. A strong wind had picked up outside, and the rustling of leaves could be heard in the room. Her heart began to beat faster, and she didn't understand how he managed to guess. Helio said she was slow to react and needed to point the sword in his direction. The girl didn't understand what he meant or why she should have done that. He explained that if someone else had been in his place, she would have been in danger, and her behavior, speech, even her steps should show that she was Medea. He wanted to help. To which she asked why he was doing this, and didn't he despise her? Looking at her carefully, Helio pondered her words, and then he answered that he had been commanded to keep her safe, and it was the order of the lady Medea. Meanwhile, Medea, being in Psyche's body, smiled and looked pleased. Looking at her watch, she thought that the royal banquet would begin in 5 days. Divine power was the backbone of the Ephrto Empire. It had 2 branches of power. The first was the royal family in charge of politics. The second was the Holy Church, which maintained stability within. They gave rise to further history. Many socialites were waiting for the debutante, marking the beginning of the Rasvet. 3 years ago, at a banquet, a man said that today was an important day, for they would finally see Count Polly's daughter. The man asked if that was strange. There were rumors of her chronic illness, and that the Countess had given birth to a demon instead of a child. However, he had heard that the Count hid her because of her father's love and worry. They turned around and asked Medea what she thought of this. These were their roles in society. One was vilified before her debut, and the other gained influence. And it was a favor given to the powerful. Medea answered, "Who knows?" As many influential people conceal disadvantages to their family. The aristocrats agreed with her, saying that she was very shrewd. After saying this, she looked away. Someone said whether he was not dreaming. A man asked if this girl, "No, this lady is the daughter of Count Polly." It was noisy all around. In front of them, all saw a young beauty in a yellow dress, who charmed everyone. In fact, Psyche's appearance was a great shock to Medea. The night came on. The full moon illuminated the Duke of Belial's mansion. There were 2 stacks of books on the table, with a vase of flowers beside them. Helio, as promised, helped Psyche become Medea. He asked her to straighten her back and cheer up, for there is a lot to memorize to match Medea's level. She asked if Medea really learned it at 8 years old. He said, "Don't look at it that way," and advised her to keep him passive and cold with others. She replied, "All right." The Marquis looked at her carefully and wondered if she could cope. She had no skills in the humanities, general erudition, political science, but at least she had instincts that turned on at critical moments. So he had only to rely on her instincts. The moon shone brightly in the night sky, which was surrounded by many stars. Psyche sat on her bed and looked sadly out the window at the moon. She laughed and said, "Isn't he going to set her free?" The crown prince stood near the window and touched his hand to the glass. The butler reported that nothing suspicious was going on at the duke's estate. He smiled and said he would believe it this time, and that 2 were better than 1. The day of the banquet arrived, and Helio's carriage was approaching the Duke of Belial's mansion. Upon seeing Medea, the Marquis asked in surprise why she was dressed like that. He thought her outfit rather extravagant. The girl smiled and asked if she looked a little strange. The Marquis replied that she dressed as if she were the guest of honor at a banquet. He reminded her that she was not the crown princess and would be in danger if she stood out. She replied that this evening was special and that she had been looking forward to it for a long time. Last time, the crown prince promised to celebrate his birthday with her. Ialos looked her tenderly in the eyes, kissed her hand, and said that they had promised. The girl smiled and listened to him silently. He continued that, after many trials, that they would stand side by side after all. The day she had to go down to the cellar, she wondered what was hidden there. Of course, she expected to see a prayer room, but it would be more fun if it turned out to be a real prison. However, the place turned out to be an ordinary room. It was an unremarkable room where someone had lived a long time ago. Psyche might have lived there until at the age of 19, the day of her debut came. Lifting her hands, which were cuffed, the girl thought why. She lowered her hands and the chain jingled. It was incomprehensible to her how Ialos could know about this room. The orchestra played and the people shouted, "Honor and glory to the great Ephrto." A man announced that Crown Prince Ialos had arrived with Madame Psyche Colli. Seeing them, the aristocrats and all the guests began to clap their hands and gaze at them. Medea saw them. They finally met each other in unfamiliar roles. The girl looked at them in silence, realizing that she was supposed to be in that body. For the true Medea, Psyche's radiant smile made her want to kill her. But today, she wondered who Psyche saw before her. Medea's fixed gaze made it clear how she felt. Psyche continued to stand beside the crown prince and hold his hand. Medea wondered who she saw in her, the tyrant who had stolen the love of her life, or the man who shouldered her problems on his own shoulders. The aristocrats and all present continued to clap loudly. Psyche, hearing this sound, shuddered. She wanted to be in her body next to him. The man said they were a wonderful couple, and the woman replied that they were happy. Someone said that the crown prince and his bride were the pride of Ephrto. The real Psyche didn't understand why none of the guests noticed the switch. Helio approached her and blocked her path, telling her to stay where she was. The Marquis explained that people were gossiping on purpose to make her angry. He said whether she had forgotten his warnings and that they could only observe. The Crown Prince and Psyche stood in the middle of the hall, ready to dance together. Ialos asked if he could steal her away for the duration of the first dance. She said yes. The orchestra immediately played a waltz. Their playing was harmonious and beautiful. In the middle of the hall, the Crown Prince and Psyche twirled in a dance, falling perfectly into the rhythm. Ialos asked if everything was okay, since she hadn't stepped on his foot once. This frustrated as well as pleased him. Psyche asked if she had done a good job. Smiling, he replied, no doubt she had saved him from embarrassment at the evening in question. The girl, seeing his reaction, said he looked very happy. He wanted to give her a present. She was surprised, for it was his birthday. Ialos said that he knew the true meaning of life only after meeting her. And so today is a wonderful day for him. As she changed his worldview, she did not believe his speeches, for he could not distinguish his bride from another girl. Later, Ialos met with delegates from other countries who wanted to congratulate him. One man brought jewelry from the south and asked to accept it as a gift. Then, another man came to wish the Crown Prince a happy birthday. A subordinate approached Ialos and informed him that the special guests had arrived. The Crown Prince replied, fine. Psyche sat next to him and heard everything. He approached her and said he would step aside for a while. She replied that she would wait for him. This made her a little wary, and the girl hesitated. Then she got up and walked across the hall, hoping to meet Helio. The Marquis was upstairs and saw her go, so he looked at her carefully. She glimpsed him, signaling for him to follow her. Medea, meanwhile, was left alone, trying to find the Marquis of Travium. A girl with pink hair was walking towards her and called out to her. She smiled and said, so that's where she was, and that she had already searched for her. The girl was disturbed by the latest rumors. Medea asked what rumors, to which she replied that everyone was talking about Medea's passionate crush on the Crown Prince. Medea knew at once that this was the Count of Serre's youngest daughter. The Marquis had spoken of her. This girl followed Lady Medea everywhere, but Medea continually ignored her, which greatly offended and annoyed her. One day at a tea party, she poured tea on Psyche. Her face and dress became wet. When she apologized, she said she had not noticed her and wanted to pour out the cooled tea. Then, smiling, asked if Psyche could ask Lady Medea for help. Helio thought that Lady Serre regretted her actions, for Ialos had chosen Psyche. Lady Serre was obsessed with wanting power and influence in society. Now, Lady Serre wanted to ridicule Medea in order to lend support to Psyche. Psyche went out on the balcony and noticed that it was a little windy today. It seemed to her that everything was going according to plan, but she felt trapped. She realized that Polly's family was connected to the church, and the imperial family knew it. The relationship between the two factions was terrible. Ialos chose her for a reason. Everything seemed to be like a fairy tale, the hero overcoming obstacles for the sake of his love. But she knew the truth and realized there must be something else she was missing. Feeling the leaves fly toward her, she looked forward questioningly. In front of her, she saw Marquis Trivium holding onto a tree branch. He quickly jumped onto the balcony and silently joined her. The girl smiled and said cheerfully that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and he had gotten thinner. Her smiling eyes and unique tone made it immediately clear that Medea was in front of him. Haley revealed that he had been so concerned about the question of her well-being. Meanwhile, Medea asked Lady Serre about a passionate crush. Medea was surprised that there were such rumors about her, and it was hard for her to deny it. She thought it was only to Lady Serre's advantage that such things were said about her. If it wasn't for that, Medea wouldn't have turned a blind eye to her insolent attitude. Upon hearing that Medea wanted to slit her throat, Lady Serre fell silent. Medea continued to stare at her coldly, causing her to start trembling. A girl came up to Medea and said that Lady Serre was not herself. She said that Medea knew better and didn't understand why these unfounded rumors. Lady Serre replied that they had asked to speak to Lady Medea about it themselves. Psyche now realized that if it was that simple, she could have a life like Medea. The man asked if the Crown Prince had gone outside. The girl didn't think so. She asked if he thought the Crown Prince and Psyche would get married next year. Medea heard this and did not understand why she now showed pride and arrogance. She abruptly grabbed her overflow when she heard the taunts from the girls. Then she walked away, wondering if there was any benefit to living like Medea, looking down on everyone. It was dark outside. From behind the clouds, behind the castle, the moon appeared, illuminating everything around. She quickly ran out onto the balcony, breathing heavily. There was no one near her. She was sad and hurt that the person she wanted to protect was gone. Her favorite and smiling crown prince was no longer beside her. The girl sat up and thought if this was a dream, she wished someone would wake her up. Unable to bear it, she shouted that she hated everything and wanted to go back. Looking up at the sky, the girl sincerely said, "I want to go back to my body." Meanwhile, an important meeting was taking place in a remote room of the castle. The knights were well prepared, and all carried swords. The crown prince counted everyone present and counted 5 knights. He was pleased that everyone was on time and stood before him. These members of the elite order of knights had been raised by the imperial family for many years. Ialos explained that their target was extremely weak and 1 fighter would suffice. However, he needed assurances, so he gave them the order. The crown prince ordered the knights to bring him the head of his bride, Psyche Colli. He believed that no one would suspect him of killing the crown princess during the banquet. To them, he is the victim in this tragic love story, not the mastermind behind the crime. The girl gently stroked Marquis Helio's head. He learned if Ialos did not marry her within a year, the soul would return to his body. And, if nothing happens on the annual day of prayer, it will remain in this body. Heli said that he would remember this. He asked her little and was glad to be near her. She wanted him to get information from Psyche about Ialos. They turned around because they heard someone walking in their direction. Helio took her hand and told her that he had to get out of sight. But before he left her a small gift wrapped in a handkerchief. The Marquis explained that she would still need this gift. The girl immediately untied the handkerchief and thought that Heli knew her well. Smiling, she tucked it away in her sleeve. The knight informed her that Ialos was looking for her. She asked if he had taken care of business. The knight replied that yes, he was waiting for her in the garden. If they had more time, Helio would have something to tell her. No matter where her soul moves to, she will be the one he will give his life for. The huge chandelier sparkled brightly and illuminated the entire huge hall. This time, the ballroom was beautifully decorated, and everything was sparkling all around. The Marquis looked around, trying to figure out where Lady Psyche had gone. He regretted leaving her alone for a few minutes, for she was not to be relaxed with. Lady Sarah approached him and asked if he was looking for Medea. She asked for a favor. Lady Sarah explained that she had said a couple of phrases to Medea that might have made her angry. The girl asked him to put in a good word for her with Lady Medea. The Marquis asked where she had gone. Lady Sarah showed her hand and said, "That way." She thanked him. Helio pushed her away and went, and she looked on in silence. The Marquis quickly hurried to Medea, hoping she hadn't done anything wrong in the meantime. There were trees all around, and it was dark. There were no stars visible in the night sky. Psyche asked if they had traveled far from the castle. The knight replied, "Who knows?" He explained that they had simply followed His Highness's orders. Suddenly, the knight drew his sword from its sheath, which rang out. Psyche replied that there was nothing here. The knight quickly struck her with his sword. She turned around and dodged the attack, but he managed to cut off some of her hair. The knight was greatly surprised that she managed to dodge the blow so deftly. The girl stepped back, stumbled, and quickly crouched down. The knight wondered if she had slipped by accident, whether it was luck or good fortune for her. She immediately panicked and asked in a trembling voice what they remembered the crown prince's words that their target was weak and 1 fighter would suffice. The girl thought that she had never been timid in front of the imperial family. The knight grabbed her clothes and asked her not to move, then it would be over quickly. Then he struck again with his sword. Blood suddenly splattered in different directions. Marquis Helio walked forward quickly. He smiled and said joyfully that he had found her. She had hidden herself pretty well. Up ahead, he saw Medea sitting with her head down. Helio walked over to her and silently sat down next to her. She remained silent and continued to cry. He never thought he would see Lady Medea in tears again. Her weeping eyes were red and full of sadness. He gently wiped away her tears, not knowing when he would witness such a scene again. She said that Medea was no match for her, and she was amazing, for she was still unrevealed, even by the crown prince himself. Remembering him made her feel sad and hurt, but she tried to hold back her tears. The wind had picked up, and the rustling of the leaves of the trees that grew nearby could be heard. The girl said that soon she would make another mistake and run away with her tail between her legs, and one day someone would find out what a weak person she was. Her tears were falling down. She wondered if it wouldn't destroy everything Medea had worked for over the years. Helio replied that Medea would never let that happen. He believed that Medea was too powerful and would not fail because of it. Psyche's face was all in the knight's blood, and she was still alive. She listened to him silently and then looked at Helio carefully. The girl asked if he loved Medea. In fact, her question surprised the Marquis. He replied that it was a little strange to hear such a thing from the lips of Lady Medea. Helio hesitated for a moment. Suddenly, a snowflake fell on his cheek, and he said that it was snowing. It dawned on Medea that perhaps she had become Psyche for this moment. The knight told his friend to finish fiddling with her corpse and go to them. They wanted him to hurry, as it was time for them to leave. His dead body fell down. Seeing the dead knight, the knights were shocked and did not understand how this was possible. The knight's body lay motionless, and his eyes were open and looking up. Psyche laughed. The crows rose up and flew away, sensing the aura of death. The girl smiled and said what a pity, and that it wasn't her blood. Her face and clothes were covered in the knight's blood, and in her hands she held her weapon tightly. It was a little present from her good friend Heli, and this gift was of great use to her today, and also saved the life of this body. The knight closed his eyes and couldn't believe that she had killed another knight with one blow. He wondered if this woman was really Psyche. She was not afraid, but smiling. The knight shouted for everyone to hold the distaff. He didn't have time to finish because of Psyche. She was quickly next to him and wound his cheek, and he didn't even have time to draw his sword. Psyche pointed her blade at him and shouted for him to answer her question. She asked who ordered her assassination. Someone from another kingdom or the Crown Prince. A drop of sweat ran down the knight's cheek, and a blade was held to his neck. Receiving no answer, Psyche said, since he chose to remain silent, then another knight who was standing nearby, ran sharply towards her. The knight on the move quickly drew his sword from its sheath, which rang loudly. He immediately struck Psyche with his sword, but she managed to fend him off with her dagger. The knight's blow was so strong that it was hard for her to resist it. She immediately bounced to the side and continued to hold the dagger tightly in her hands. The two knights stood silently in front of her and did not attack, but they realized that they had underestimated her. The knight held on to his neck and couldn't believe she was trying to kill him. Psyche immediately realized that the battle had just begun, and the soldiers in front of her were no ordinary soldiers. Despite the suddenness on the part of the enemy, the warriors quickly adapted. But she was not a helpless lady, but an equal opponent ready to defeat them. The knight struck at her again with his sword, and Psyche repelled his blow with her blade. Her hands were trembling. Because of her frail hands, it was a little hard for her to block the blow. The king of the kingdom of Henel approached the crown prince and greeted him. He bowed and sincerely congratulated the crown prince on his 21st birthday. Ialos quickly looked around, trying to find his bride Psyche, but Psyche was nowhere to be found. There were only aristocrats and guests from other countries around. He smiled and looked pleased, thinking that his knights had carried out their orders. It seemed to him that everything had gone well, just as he had planned. The king said that the crown prince seemed to be in high spirits. Smiling, he replied that today was a very joyous day, so he was happy. The moon was barely visible from behind the clouds. There was noise and laughter and music coming from the castle. Little snowflakes were slowly falling on the leaves of the trees. Helio said they should go back. He promised not to leave her side in the hall. It didn't mean he didn't understand her feelings, just that she had given up too quickly. The Marquis advised her to try to act more consciously at times like this. Furthermore, he noticed that she was jealous of Lady Medea, but still asked if he was right. He remembered the way she had held Medea's hand and the look she had given her. The girl paused for a moment and stood still. She smiled and asked how she could not be jealous, for Medea was strong. Meanwhile, another knight began to attack Psyche, swinging his sword. The girl was well aware that she could not face him in close combat, since she was undoubtedly inferior to him in physical abilities. The knight was quickly beside her and struck her hard with his sword. She immediately dodged the blow and crouched nearby. Quickly grabbing some earth with her hand, she decided to use it in battle. Psyche threw the earth into the face of the knight, who managed to cover himself with his cloak. He shouted angrily that this was a cowardly act, but she paid no heed to his words, but struck him at once with her blade. He checked in which hand she held the blade, but Psyche attacked from the other side. Her blade was covered in blood, and drops of blood were dripping down from it. She said that it was not for her to listen to accusations from people who attacked her in a mob. The girl lifted his cloak and examined his clothes. Seeing no emblem, she realized they did not belong to the orders of knighthood. Then she wondered who had sent them. At that moment, another knight attacked her from behind, striking her hard with his sword. The girl turned around and grabbed him by his cloak. Psyche then struck him with her blade. His view was completely blocked. The knight realized that he was becoming more vulnerable with each passing second. He needed to protect vital points. He quickly repelled her blow with his hand, but the girl wasn't going to back down and was ready for it. Going into hand-to-hand combat, she said, was an imprudent move in his situation. Psyche quickly pierced him with her blade. The knight screamed, and the blade fell to the ground. She quickly took the blade in her hand and strode forward with determination. Holding a blade in both hands, she thought that now she must win. As she approached the knight, she quickly attacked him with a deadly blow. All she had to do was dodge the enemy's attacks and aim her blade at his heart. This tactic could help her finish the fight without suffering any casualties. After seeing her kill the third knight, the two remaining knights were ready to fight. The knight didn't understand how she managed to defeat the trained men in a couple seconds. After all, they were an elite order of knights created by the imperial family. He remembered the first time the Crown Prince had reached out to him. The knight had been so proud when His Highness Ialos had selected them on his own. Only the strongest knight in the empire could withstand a fight like this. Psyche said that even if she broke their fingers, they would remain loyal to their master. The knights shuddered and continued to hold their swords tightly in their hands to protect themselves. The girl said she was asking them one last time, hoping she would get an answer. The knight realized that she meant that she would kill them if she didn't get an answer from them, but it seemed to him that she already knew the answer and was looking for confirmation of her guesses. As the fight continued, she tried to remember when she began to hate Psyche. She wanted to understand why a strong contempt for her person had built up inside. The fight continued, and she quickly and skillfully repelled all of the knight's attacks. She was annoyed by the circumstances and that she had to fight instead of Psyche. She thought perhaps God had switched their souls so that she would die instead. But even if that was true, she didn't care and was concerned about other things. Holding her blades firmly in both hands, she fought two knights at the same time. In fact, she had always believed in the mutability of fate. When she was 8 years old, Medea Belid received a small bear cub as a gift. This cute brown bear cub was a real surprise to her. She asked her babysitter if her mom really gave this toy to her for her birthday. Nanny answered that it was true. The Duke and Duchess had prepared this present for her. Before she left, she said that Medea has class tomorrow and she should go to bed early. Upon seeing the nanny, the maid said that it was a crime to act on the Lord's behalf. She asked how a teddy bear bought at the store became a gift for the ducal daughter. The nanny replied, if they were to wonder where the toy came from, then they were worried about her. Medea whispered that it must have been hard to buy a toy on a small salary. Duchess asked if she thought such a small thing was an outstanding achievement. The teacher replied that this literature could be understood by reaching adulthood. She felt that the Duchess's support would help Medea as she developed further. Instead of support, the Duchess grabbed Medea's arm and told her not to get cocky. The Duchess believed that anyone could excel in a subject while young, and Medea is her daughter, and should become a genius who is born once in 1,000 years. And she will have to accomplish a lot to leave her mark on history. After her words, Medea studied constantly and did not rest, so her nose bled. She said that she must study harder to make her mark in history when she became an adult. Nanny gently stroked her cheek. Medea asked not to tell her parents about it. She thought they wouldn't like it if they started bothering them about nothing. Barely holding back her tears, the nanny hugged her and told her that Medea had a fever. The woman asked the girl not to overexert herself since she was still so small. Medea was warm in her arms. The only thing that seemed difficult for her was love. 2 years flew by. In the first spring, something unusual happened to Medea. She looked joyfully out of the carriage window as she accompanied her father on his journey. Her father was excited. He said he had a little problem. There was a problem with food because of the weather. The woman asked if he had turned to the temple. The Duke replied that he had, and believed that people would be restless if the situation dragged on. Medea asked if it might be a good idea to start doing trade with the neighboring territory. Her father listened to her intently. Medea said that they were near the border, so we should offer to send knights to them in exchange for food. The woman clapped her hands and praised Medea, saying that she was shrewd. She also told the Duke that he had brought up his daughter beautifully. Sitting in the study, the Duke thought what Medea said was not a mistaken opinion. He didn't understand why he himself hadn't thought of it sooner. His thoughts were interrupted by the butler, who had entered the study and was waiting for his instructions. The Duke asked Butler to contact the Margrave immediately. Thanks to this decision, they survived the next year's famine in peace. The Duke was invited to the palace, rewarded for his thoughtful decisions, and recognized as a hero. It was also through this that the Duke gained the trust of the Margrave himself. From then on, the Duke came to Medea to hear her opinion on various matters. He even came to her when she was practicing with a sword in her hands. Or any other time, the Duke always needed his daughter's help. The woman put some of the cloth on Medea and then said that any color suited her. She thought it must be nice for Medea to have a father who treasured her so much. It was said that her father was always one step ahead and guarding his domain and empire. Medea began to suspect why she only got dresses, dolls, and jewelry, and she realized that this god-forsaken history book would have her father's name in it, not hers. And one evening, the Duke announced that Medea was to be married this year. He reminded her that she was a clever girl and could evaluate the decision for herself. Also, His Majesty had already shared his opinion and would soon announce the date of the ceremony. The Duke said that he has worked very hard for her, his daughter. Medea replied that she knew he worked hard almost every day. Then, standing in front of him, she felt helpless, angry, betrayed. Nanny caught up with Medea and gently took her hand. She didn't think such actions were right when Medea always agreed to everything. Nanny didn't want her to become crown princess or move the family toward prosperity, but she wished Medea to know happiness. Her words moved the girl. Medea hugged her and told her that she was the only one who truly cared for her. But it seemed to the girl that they still did not understand each other. The girl explained that becoming a crown princess meant for her to grow in status, and that status is higher than the Duke's daughter. Medea realized that she was like her father in this respect. She realized that no one would share power with useless pawns. The Henel Empire began to openly express their displeasure at the agreement, and His Majesty was quite concerned. The Duke asked what Medea thought about it. She replied that one could refuse a small piece and then eat the whole fruit. If it were up to her to decide, she would first make concessions and then attack from the east. One day Medea came to a tea party. She walked past the red roses. The first time Psyche saw her, she was delighted, for she liked her very much. She could not take her gaze off her, realizing that she was the Lady Medea of the rumors. People were frightened by the fact that the Belial family had gained authority in all areas of society. The girl said she was looking forward to Medea becoming crown princess. After all, if Lady Medea came to power, their empire would become even more powerful. Psyche whispered that Medea is really strong and incredibly beautiful. From then on, Psyche began to secretly watch Medea from afar on the street. She would also hide behind the pillars at the tea party and watch her. One day, Psyche hid in the bushes and watched her. The knight and Medea saw her. When it got dark outside, her irritated voice came from Medea's room. Medea didn't understand why she kept watching, rather than coming over and talking to her. Helio asked if she meant Psyche. She replied that he was right. Medea wondered what she was trying to say, but Psyche was just watching her. The Marquis said that Psyche's uncertainty seemed even more suspicious. He thought that because of her engagement to Ialos, everyone wanted to win Medea's favor. She agreed with him, saying that it would soon stop because of the rumors about her identity. Medea heard a man say that Psyche was different from the other daughters. They thought Medea was a little wild, while Psyche was gentle, like an angel. The man was smitten by her charm and suggested they meet at a musical evening. Medea walked past. She thought that now Psyche would leave her alone. Psyche told them to confess that they were judging others and to apologize to Medea. She thought they knew nothing about Medea and therefore had a duty to apologize. The man asked when it was that they were judging behind her back. His friend told him to step back. He slapped her on the cheek, saying he heard she was raised in almost hothouse conditions, but that was no reason to show her terrible manners. There was a ringing in her ears. The man decided that a good beating would put things right and wanted to hit her. But Medea grabbed him firmly by the arm and hit him hard on the head herself. The girl was so angry that her eyes blazed with anger and rage. She continued to strike one blow after another, and his blood scattered around. His face and head were covered in blood, and he couldn't even stop her. His friend was frightened and ran away, leaving him alone on his knees before Psyche. Psyche could not believe that she had come to help her. She asked, "Lady Medea?" Medea grabbed her hand and was not surprised that Psyche was weak and frail. Her words made Medea wonder if she was hiding power under her mask. She said that the man who struck her was known for his violent tendencies. Psyche said, "Why is she telling her that?" She asked, "She should have said otherwise." Psyche then cried and asked if such situations had become a habit. But she did not understand why Psyche was crying, for it was not Medea who had been harmed. Medea realized that this side of Psyche would not let her remain indifferent to her. One day, her nanny asked her if Medea was going to see Psyche again. She replied that it was only because of her incessant reproaches and whining. The nanny laughed. Medea said that she was very much like Nanny, who saw her as a grown-up lady. When they met, Psyche said that people compared them to a queen and a pawn, and she couldn't change that. Medea asked if she knew how to play chess. Psyche replied that she didn't know how, and her knowledge ended with the common piece. the pawn. Medea asked her to show her something. Soon, chess was brought to their room. Medea showed how a pawn infiltrated enemy territory and earned its freedom, and then Medea explained the capabilities of the other pieces, namely the bishop, the knight, and the rook. Medea also explained that even queens can borrow this pawn, and that the pawn's skin gives it the ability to fulfill the role of anyone or anything. Psyche was surprised and clutched her dress tightly with her hands, but she could not hold back her tears. Medea explained that she did not say this to see her tears or to offend her. She thought that perhaps the anxiety in her heart was a premonition of the coming turmoil. One day, the Duke suddenly announced that her engagement to the Crown Prince had been broken off. The girl was standing near an open window and, recognizing this, turned round and asked what. The Duke said that everything had happened unexpectedly, and His Majesty was confused. Ialos announced a contest for the Crown Princess's seat, wanting to choose the bride himself. Medea was shocked. This news of hers simply shook her to the core. She didn't realize if this was the moment when everything went down. Beautiful music could be heard from the imperial castle. The banquet continued. Medea looked around excitedly and heard what people were saying. Some were talking about the crown prince, some about a guest who had arrived recently, and some about wine. She realized that nothing had changed during her absence. The girl thought everything would be fine, since the Marquis of Travium was by her side. Helio suddenly couldn't keep his balance and staggered. Medea supported him. He grabbed his head and said why he was here. Medea asked who he was. Looking up, she saw the crown prince standing near the two noblemen. The Marquis said why he was here alone. Because of this, he began to feel strongly about her, for he himself had heard the crown prince invite Medea for a private conversation in the garden. Helio remembered her words. Whether he could find out information about Ialos from Psyche, he realized that Medea was wary, having noticed the danger in the face of the crown prince. Realizing it was a trap, Marquis quickly went to rescue her. Medea shouted after him where he was going, but Helio said nothing and continued on his way. In a short time, he was in a garden not far from the imperial castle. He hurried on before it was too late, and he did not know how much danger Medea was in. His body trembled, and a tear ran down his cheek. He had a bad feeling. 7 years ago on this day, he wanted to die rather than live a miserable existence. When Medea came to his aid, he vowed to become stronger to protect her. In trying to fulfill that promise, he often risked himself to escape the clutches of death, and if he couldn't save her now, it was all pointless. Psyche ran after him. Helio clutched his head and mumbled what he had to do. She asked him again. He said he had to find the garden where Ialos had invited her. There were only 12 gardens of equal size in the imperial palace. He unfortunately did not know how he could find the right garden. Psyche called out to him. She said she knew everything, but she didn't understand why he had become so agitated. The girl explained that she knew of the garden to which Ialos had invited her and would guide him there. Another knight was defeated, and his last scream could be heard in the garden. The girl, holding her weapon tightly in her hands, looked at the last knight. She called him poor man and asked why he was watching the battle from afar. Was he frightened? Left without the support of his friends? The knight was ready for battle. It became clear to her that this knight was analyzing her and saw the weaknesses of her body. The dagger began to shake in her hands, and continuing the fight was only dangerous for her. Her attacks were fast, and she easily managed to wound the knight. She wanted to end this battle as quickly as possible, but suddenly there was a crunch in her shoulder. She had endured the pain all this time, but now she didn't know if she could dodge the attack. The weather outside was sunny. A small bird sat on a branch and chirped. Through the window of the room, it could be seen that Psyche was still on the bed sleeping. Her nanny came up to her and tried to wake her up. She said it was time to get up. Psyche replied, 5 more minutes. But the nanny said, you can't, and you have to get up. Nanny said there was a letter waiting for her, sent from the imperial palace. The girl stood up and started yawning, trying to cover her mouth with her hand, and picked up the letter. What Psyche read in the letter surprised her very much. She had been chosen as one of the candidates for the crown princess position. After a while, Psyche told Medea about it and asked if it was a joke. Medea answered nothing, but only continued to drink tea in silence. Her silence disturbed Psyche, and she realized that it was clearly not a joke. Medea didn't show her emotions. Looking cold and not worried about it, Psyche became agitated and said that this was unthinkable, and there was no logic here. She asked if they organized the fight to make them rivals. Psyche was not thinking of becoming the crown princess, but wanted to marry the man she loved. Medea said she was sure she would win, and Psyche would not become the crown princess. Of course, the imperial family would not back down, and had a reason to make her a candidate. Medea suggested she see it as an opportunity to learn and become a better person. Hearing this, Psyche thought about this opportunity that had presented itself to her. She smiled and promised that she would do her best in the competition. Everyone discussed the competition for the position of Crown Princess, which consisted of 3 contests. The first was a test of knowledge of the affairs of the empire, and the second was to establish a relationship with a vassal. People clapped their hands joyfully when they saw who was able to get the coat of arms from the vassal. It was Lady Medea, who easily won the first 2 competitions. Psyche said that Medea was not lying when she talked about the difficulty of the competitions. Medea replied that she was the only person smiling after losing. The people around them said that there was one last stage left and were confident that Medea would win. Psyche and Medea's sincere friendship made the man support both girls. Lady Medea was always known in society, and this was the first time he had heard of Lady Polly. The last contest began. Medea and Psyche bowed to the emperor. The people who had gathered in the square to see the contest also bowed. The emperor thanked all those gathered. Today was deciding the future of the empire. He said that the final test would be a speech on caring for the citizens. Although the winner was known, the emperor asked everyone to fight to the end. The girls bowed to them. Medea smiled and replied that she would do his will, and Psyche only remained silent and thought that she would do everything in her power for the sake of the empire. Raising her head, Psyche saw the crown prince, who smiled. And so the time came when Psyche was to make her speech. She introduced herself and suggested that a new direction in the country's politics should be considered. The policy proposed by Psyche was to support the lower classes. The townspeople praised her. Medea knew that Psyche's plan was difficult to put into action. His Majesty, who must choose the winner, did not look very pleased. However, the crown prince smiled and thought about something for a moment. Medea was wary when she saw the look on his face. She thought she had imagined it. Someone asked who would be next. The woman replied that it would be Lady Medea. She stepped forward. Medea realized that the breaking of their engagement was not a misunderstanding. The blue sky was covered with white clouds. It became quiet all around, so Medea had to win the last contest. She introduced herself. Despite the stares of the crowd, she gave a thrilling speech. She managed to clearly state quite reasonable thoughts on effective policy. The emperor clutched the throne tightly with his hands. The crown prince called out to him, but he did not respond. He said that the distinguished daughter of a distinguished man had followed in his own footsteps. Medea knew that the emperor had the last word, so she decided to impress him. When Medea finished her speech, everyone said that the victory remained with Lady Belid. The woman rejoiced that Medea had 3 victories, and the girl thought it was incredible. The girl in the hat asked what position Lady Polly would be in. She said that Medea's policy was aimed at the nobility, and Psyche's was aimed at the common people. Helio, Medea, and Psyche were gathered in the room. Nanny brought them tea. All 3 were enjoying flavored tea and talking about something. Nanny looked carefully at Medea and Helio. In fact, she had long been accustomed to seeing the couple together, but now there were 3 of them, and they were all chatting happily with each other. Smiling, the nanny said it was so sweet to see them all together joyful. Medea asked Psyche if she was so hungry that she didn't even touch her dessert. It was also obvious that she was worried about something. Psyche apologized to her. She said she would be home early today. Helio decided to see her off. Psyche got into the carriage, which drove away quickly. The nanny asked why he had walked her. Helio replied that he did not want Medea to waste her precious time. Nanny then asked if he still disliked Lady Psyche. The Marquis looked at her carefully and remained silent, pondering his answer. He said he had great respect for Nanny, who treasured Lady Medea more than anyone else, and that she and he would not hesitate to sacrifice their lives for Medea. But Psyche, in his opinion, might have given up this friendship had the occasion arisen. Outside, the wind picked up and the leaves of the trees rustled. The sun began to set. Nanny replied that this was to be expected, for it had been 2 years since they had met. Helio at such moments reminded Nanny of a child. She stroked his head. The woman said that Medea had praised him for his incredibly developed intuition. He remained silent, and his cheeks even flushed with embarrassment. The nanny confessed that he and Medea, the ones she would not condemn for childishness. Psyche stopped and said quietly, "As expected, you are already here." The man replied that he had been waiting for her, and she probably had some questions for him. She replied that she was worried that by becoming a candidate, she would never meet him. But in the end, as it turned out, it was his status as crown prince that secured the place for her. Ialos removed his hood, smiled contentedly, and looked at her tenderly. She asked why he had kept it from her. He replied that he had kept some details quiet. Psyche said that she lost in all the contests because she dreamed of their walks, and now it seemed to her that everything she had dreamed of for so long had been ruined. Ialos wanted to take her hand, but she wouldn't let him. He said that nothing would change. She replied that she was deceiving Medea because of him and asked him to think about her feelings. He asked if she shouldn't be happy that her beloved is the crown prince. Ialos asked her to think of the cellar. Psyche immediately thought of handcuffs. He asked who had said to him, "You straight up pulled me out of hell." She was startled. The crown prince held out his hand to her and asked her to come to him. The girl quickly came to him and he hugged her, telling her how she would live without him. Medea held the investigation report in her hands. She read it carefully, which told of a secret investigation. Helio learned that Ialos had been secretly leaving the palace at night for some time, and these sorties had just begun since Psyche's debut into high society. But then Medea did not believe his conjectures and all his suspicions. She burned the report of the investigation, saying it was a mere coincidence. The sun had just risen, and the long-awaited day of the ceremony had arrived. Nanny offered Medea a silver brooch to try on, but she refused. The maid said that this dress suited her very well. The nanny asked if she was nervous. She wished her luck and promised to bake a pumpkin pie for her return. Medea laughed and said she would be home soon. The horses quickly carried Duke Belial's carriage to the imperial palace. They were met by a servant from the house of the Marquis of Note, who brought a gift for Medea. Their head presented a necklace, a family heirloom, and asked them to wear it to the ceremony. The Duke took the necklace and said it was so sweet and very kind of them. He then abruptly threw the precious necklace straight to the ground. The Duke stomped the necklace with his foot, not thinking about the fact that it was a family heirloom. He recalled when Medea's engagement was cancelled, they were the first to turn their backs on them. Medea said nothing, but smiled happily and agreed with her father. The sun was already high, and everyone was eagerly waiting for the ceremony to begin. The Duke was approached by aristocrats, who asked him to accept their congratulations. Helio also came, but he had dressed so that he would not be recognized, and was among the townspeople. Someone said for everyone to be quiet, as His Holiness was on his way. A man asked if he would perform the ceremony. The woman replied, "It is an important event." Medea said she would like to ask Psyche one question before the ceremony. She asked if it was true that she and His Highness Psyche interrupted her. She said that her feelings for him were not important, and she would accept defeat with dignity. Medea mentally asked her to forgive her, for she couldn't say she would give her the title, because being a member of the imperial family was her main goal. She had devoted a lot of time to that goal, and could not give up the title so easily. Helio didn't forget that Medea had told him not to let his guard down until the very end. The tension in the crowd was building. People were saying that the winner had long been known. He heard disgruntled shouts from the crowd that it wasn't fair. Helio saw a woman. The Marquis thought it was a familiar face. He began to remember where he had seen her before. He remembered that he had once heard her say that Lady Psyche was an angel, and also that Medea's politics were aimed at the nobility, while Psyche's were aimed at the common people. She was turning everyone against Medea, saying why the event had to be held. Helio sprang into immediate action. He abruptly grabbed her hand and called out to her. The hat flew off her head. The girl turned around, and when she saw him, she was very frightened. She ran away, and Helio could not stop her, for the name of the crown princess was being announced. The Holy Father smiled and asked Lady Psyche Colli to step forward. Everyone around, as well as Helio, was surprised that Psyche had been chosen over Medea. They did not understand why Medea, who had won all the stages, did not become the crown princess. Helio noticed that that woman had an unusual eye color, and he would be able to find her. The man said that the Holy Father is prescient and knows who should get the title. Hearing that it was His Holiness's choice, the men decided they had no right to object. The crown prince pulled Psyche's hand toward him and kissed her tenderly in front of everyone. He said he was moved by the speech she made in the third trial. Ialos got down on his knee and said that although he was the crown prince, he was also an ordinary man. So he wanted to spend the rest of his life with the one he loved. Seeing his romantic and sincere confession, the people supported the crown prince. The emperor couldn't help it. He thought Ialos had made a clever move, because even the emperor couldn't match that kind of public support. Unfortunately, he couldn't help Medea, who was to receive the title. Medea didn't understand how this happened. She fought fair and won, but she believed that nothing was lost yet, and Psyche could give up the title. However, to her surprise, Psyche was happy and had no plans to do so. And at that moment, Medea remembered explaining to her the role of a pawn in chess, that the skin of a pawn gives you the ability to fulfill the role of anyone or anything. And so the pawn in front of her became a queen. Psyche had a crown placed on her head. She took the scepter in her hands and stood beside the crown prince, smiling happily at him. The man standing next to her turned to the duke and asked if he was all right. The duke was so angry and could barely contain his anger and resentment inside. After a while, the duke went back to his estate. He hit Nanny hard, asking her how she would be held accountable for her blunder. The duke said that their house had been dishonored because she had not raised Medea well. When Medea opened the door, she stopped and called out to her father, who was beating her nanny. But the duke did not answer, but wanted to punish the nanny severely to gather his daughter Medea. When she saw the swollen face of her nanny, who looked at her sadly, she ran to her, but the servants stopped her, saying that the duke would be furious if she interfered. Medea shouted that there was nothing they could do to influence further events. She said she had tried her best, that it was her fault, and asked for it to stop. Nanny's face was covered in blood. She whispered with her last strength for Medea to run away. Tears were running down Medea's cheeks. It was hard for her to see her nanny being beaten. Medea did not listen to her. When the duke was about to strike her nanny, she covered her with herself. Several days passed. Medea did not regain consciousness. The doctor said it was because of the shock. The Duchess thought that wasn't what was important right now. They needed to get rid of Nanny's body. The nanny was the sister of a noblewoman. If this was found out, the duke's name would be tarnished. They decided to tell that she had been sent on an errand to the nearest town. But suddenly in the mountains, she came across bandits who attacked and killed her. Helio was sitting in a tree and saw Medea's younger brother stab the nanny with a blade. He realized if he killed them, the duke would realize who did it, and the situation would become more complicated. The Marquis remembered the last time he had spoken to Nanny, and she had smiled at him, how she had stroked his head. He wondered if he should sit idly by, whether he should sit still, doing nothing. The men threw Nanny's body down the cliff to make everything fit the attack. Her bloody body was falling rapidly downward. There was no more light in her eyes. Helio remembered again how she had smiled sweetly at him and gently stroked his head. Medea's brother told everyone to say that Nanny had fallen off a cliff while running away from bandits. When they left, Helio went down and looked down where Nanny's body had been dumped. Medea finally woke up and slowly opened her eyes. She was exhausted. The maid was very glad that Medea woke up, for it had been a whole week. After a while, she met Helio and asked what had happened to the nanny. He led her to a green glade where the body of her nanny lay covered with a white cloth. Medea immediately asked if Sir Lemaire was the capital's most famous physician. Would he be able to bring her back to life if they called for him now? Heli answered nothing. She hugged Nanny's dead body and wanted to hear Heli answer, but he remained silent. Medea said it was so quiet, and then asked if it alarmed him. She laid her head on her body, saying she must hear something. She wanted to hear at least Nanny's heartbeat. Tears ran down her cheeks. Unable to contain the pain inside, she sobbed. Her cry resembled a beastly roar. Helio put his arms around her. Medea cried out how Psyche could betray her friend. She had felt sorry for Psyche earlier, but now she took every last bit of it from Medea. She wondered if she and the crown prince had planned all this in advance. Helio was also blinded by anger, but one truth managed to elude him. For the real enemy, the one they should despise, lurked constantly in the shadows, and no one guessed that it was he who had stolen all that was so dear to Medea. The crown prince stood surrounded by several noblemen and talked to them about something. He looked at the glass of red wine in his hand and thought that the time had come. Ialos decided to get things started when the noise and excitement of the banquet reached its climax. For then he would put on a show for everyone called The Search for the Missing Psyche, and Medea, on whom the blame for her murder would fall, had left the castle just in time. He thought that Ephrato's guardian god would bless him on this birthday. The wind grew stronger and swirled the leaves in the air. The whole garden was noisy. The girl told Helio to run that way, ahead. He was quick to run. Psyche thought that in her present body, she would not be able to keep up with him. Helio was running fast. His heartbeat, echoing with a hum in his ears, sounded ominous. He had a premonition that something would come to an end before the night was over, so he could not be a moment too late, and he ran without stopping. During the battle, the knight managed to strike right into Psyche's eye. She touched the wound and felt a sharp pain. Her wound was deep. The knight raised his sword up and shouted loudly that this was the end and victory was his. He attacked her again, bidding her to drop her weapon and accept her death. Psyche was able to repel his blow this time too, How presumptuous, she thought. Since the knight had managed to hit her, he immediately felt his advantage in battle. She noticed that his movements were rather haphazard. Therefore, striking at his weaknesses would not be any difficulty for her. Despite what was happening, she decided to kill him and end the battle once and for all. Suddenly, the knight ran up to her and struck her hard with his sword again. He shouted loudly for her to die. She had plans right now to die. The knight pressed his sword harder against her neck, shouting for her to die. Her strength was running out, and she wouldn't even be able to push him away now. But, quite by accident, she managed to trip him and he stumbled. The knight was not upset, for he saw that she, too, had lost her balance. He was angry. The knight decided that he needed to get back on alert. Suddenly, he saw a sharp rock on his left side. He didn't understand how she knew about it. The knight realized she couldn't have seen it as he put his sword to her neck, and she most likely managed to fumble it with her foot as she stepped back. Gathering all her strength, she quickly attacked him, and like lightning struck the knight. Psyche quickly pierced his body with her blade. She was breathing heavily, enduring all the pain and fatigue. Her face and hair were covered in blood. The knight grabbed her by her clothes and shouted that it was impossible. He said it wasn't like that at all. Their master had outlined her in a very different way. Puddles of blood were on the ground. She could not tell that the real Psyche was not before him. It was clear to her that he would not tell her who his master was, but she realized that it was the Crown Prince. The knight didn't expect to see a girl experienced in battle, but still continued to fight.